I'm sitting in Stratford-upon-Avon, not 100 yards from Shakespeare's birthplace, in a small studio where James Willetts has been editing the recordings he made of a live performance in a small theatre in Cambridge. And I've come to help him make the final tweaks to this film, which we hope will be worthy of Stratford and Cambridge and indeed Jerusalem. We've been refining the techniques of semi-staging for a dozen or so years now in earlier adaptations from Homer, Aeschylus, Sophocles and the Greek Old Testament. And here is a snippet from our production of the Book of Job to give you an idea of the style and the impact.
Οι δε ακούσαντες εμακάρισεν με, και γλώσσα αυτών το λάριγγι αυτών εκολύθη.
Τις δε έστειν ο ετάζων αυτού τα έργα.
You're going to see and hear the same two readers, both Greeks in the new play, Mark his words, still confronting each other, but this time in the role of Jesus and a Pharisee. Watch them in rehearsal now as their voices and faces bring to life the radical prophet and a master of the Jewish law.
Τι ότι μετά των τελωνών και αμαρτωλών εστί και πίνει.
Ούχριαν έχουσι ισχύοντες ιατρού, αλλά κακώς έχοντες. Ουκ ήλθον καλές σε δικαίους, αλλά αμαρτωλούς.
Our production will bring you about as close as you can possibly get to the historical figure of Jesus. Mark's Gospel is the earliest of the four, and it dates from only about 30 years after the crucifixion. Thanks to the famous first century mummy portraits at Fayoum in Egypt, we have a very good idea of the faces of the Greek-speaking Jews for whom Mark was writing in the first instance. And the music that you'll hear will recreate the sound world of 2,000 years ago, because it's being played by an early music specialist, Barnaby Brown, on a reconstruction of a classical aulos. The earliest complete text of Mark's Gospel was copied as early as 350 AD, shortly after Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. By that time, the Greek language was pronounced more or less as it is today, so that Isidore and Christos are simply speaking an archaic form of their mother tongue, which is why their delivery is as natural and convincing as you would expect from English actors performing a history play by Shakespeare. The analogy with Shakespeare works very well, by the way, and at various levels. Our play presents historical facts, just as Shakespeare does, but it's also a poetic distillation of history, a poetic drama to which we want you to respond in the same spirit as you would watch a film of Henry V. We want you to think about how the author shapes his plot, his characterization through dialogue, his use of flashback and anticipation. And that's why the punning title invites you to mark his words. For the moment, that is all you actually need to know about this production. Although I ought perhaps to explain that we shall stop short at the end of the fourth act, so to speak, at the moment of Christ's entry into Jerusalem. Now, the play should really have 3 acts in the way I've divided it, but I've omitted the final act tonight, the third act, the rapid sequence of events from Maundy Thursday through to Easter Sunday, because the story is told in more or less the same way in the other Gospels, but I'm looking at Mark's Gospel, and it's incredibly well known. I recommend you, when you've heard and been enthused tonight, between now and Easter, you let Bach and St. Matthew take you through the second half, the last act of the play. So you get the 2 acts, and we stop inside Jerusalem, but short of the Last Supper. There was so much more I wanted to say about the context and the consequences of Mark's Gospel. But in the event, I decided to leave the big issues to the specialists whom I'd invited to contribute essays to the programme, which, by the way, will be available with the film. And I tried to summarize my own thoughts by telling a true story, which is something like a riddle in form, but is in fact offered as a parable. A certain 9-year-old was taken on his first holiday ever on a punt. It was wartime, 1944, and he hadn't learned to swim yet. But within a week, he swam across the River Thames from one bank to the other. In 2015, in peacetime, his 9-year-old grandson, who'd been swimming since he was 5, had to take a ferry to get across the same river. Is the world going to the dogs? No. The answer to the riddle is that my grandson lives near the Isle of Dogs, whereas I took my first plunge up near Kemble. The interpretation of the parable is a little bit more complicated. The Thames, down near the Woolwich Ferry, which is where Matthew lives, is cold, wide, deep, muddy, tidal, and used by a lot of boats. You might say it was like Christianity after 2,000 years of evolution. And you might ask, where did all that water and mud come from? The Gospel of St. Mark, especially in our dramatisation, is like the Thames up near its source. The water is clear, pure and warm, and there are no dangers of any kind. One last point before you plunge into this clear stream. The narrator, Mark himself, has the lion's share in his gospel, but his perspective keeps changing, and it's useful to distinguish 4 voices or tones of voice as he presents Jesus in his 4 main roles. And in the event, we decided to make this visible by using 4 actors for the narration. Anthony took all the sections where Jesus is shown as the Son of God and the anointed King. Yorgos introduced the clashes between Jesus and the religious establishment. I myself narrated the acts of healing, while Martin set the scene for the parables and the many moments of insight into human nature. I hope this fragmentation of the narrator will help you to focus on the way in which Mark tells his story, and therefore to mark his words. But remember that the most important words in this film are those spoken or sown by Jesus himself. And these are spoken with such authority and sensitivity by Christos Tsiroyannis.
Και εμπέξουσιν αυτό και μαστιγώσουσιν αυτόν και εμπτήσουσιν αυτό και αποκτενούσιν αυτόν και τη τρίτη ημέρα αναστήσεται.
James, at the end of this long process of editing, I wonder if you have some thoughts to share about the whole process.
Well, I think first we filmed it in front of an audience, so it has a live theatrical atmosphere. We recorded it on 2 cameras over 2 nights to gather plenty of material for editing. The use of close-ups enables the viewer to see the expressions on the faces of the speakers and conveys their emotions. Illustrated slides and subtitles were projected onto a big screen in the theatre to help the audience follow the story. And I've included most of these in the film, mainly to accompany St. Mark's narrative. Whenever a character speaks and interacts with others, I've preferred to use subtitles with the aim of enhancing the dramatic impact that Jesus makes on everyone he meets. The overall effect is very powerful.